Does it still make sense to learn a language in 2024 and the future? This is a topic that a lot of people talk about because with the progressing technology that we have, specifically with AI, a lot of people think like, hey, it doesn't even make sense to learn a language anymore. It's going to be replaced anyway. We're going to have live translators. Why even bother? And I want to share you different reasons in this video why I'm very convinced that it still makes sense to learn a language and why I think you actually should do it. And I want to talk about different things that I haven't heard in that context. And I think they're really, really having a big impact in your life if you learn a new language, because they've had a big impact for me. And I want to share what these things are. So, the most important thing that has made a tremendous impact in my life, and I'm forever grateful about this, is that I feel like I'm having different personalities when speaking and thinking in different languages, and it makes my life so much more rich. I feel different, and I feel like I'm actually experiencing life through different lenses, if that makes sense. It's like I'm different people that are all in this body, and nothing on earth has enriched my life as much as this. So, whenever I'm in Colombia, because I have deep roots with Colombia, I note this immediately. I step out of the airport and then my brain just switches to Spanish. And what happens is that I immediately think different, I feel different, and I also perceive everything very differently in my environment. And what I also realize is that I have a very different energy in Spanish in comparison to German or English, let's say. And I think a lot of this stems from just like the system of the language, which is basically the grammar. For example, German is a lot more kind of, it's like a more complicated closed system. Spanish and English are a lot more kind of flowy. And I also feel I don't have to think as much about what I say when I socialize in English and Spanish, which is quite interesting because German is my mother tongue, right? So it should be the opposite, but it's actually easier for me to socialize in English and Spanish. And I think a lot of it, if you dive deep down into the grammar, which I don't want to bore you with that now, but I feel it makes sense because structurally the languages are different. And so what happens in your brain is actually it's like a switch where you kind of, it feels like you're unlocking a different character. And this makes life so much more beautiful, right? Because you're experiencing the environment in a different way. You're just seeing, yeah, the world through different eyes. And it's really hard to describe that. But once you reach that level, you will feel it, definitely. And it's an incredible, incredible experience. What's also funny is, by the way, and this happened to me like 10 years ago when I came back from a stay in Colombia to Germany, that my friends asked me like, hey, Stefan, what happened to your voice? You talk, a lot more kind of quiet and you talk a lot softer. And I was like, huh, interesting. And then I was kind of reflecting a little bit about it and looking into the Spanish language and the German language. And it actually turns out that if you talk a lot of Spanish, and replace the German for a while because you're living abroad, what happens is that your style of talking gets softer because in Spanish you don't have that much like intentional emphasis on words than you have in German, for example. It's a little bit more kind of feminine, the language, not that masculine, not that kind of strong. You're not coming off that strong. And this is very interesting. So you also kind of it changes your voice, right, and how people perceive you. And what some girls told me actually, in when I speak Spanish, is like, oh, sometimes when you speak Spanish, you're like a little kid, like, and then when you talk in German. Even though I don't understand anything, you have a totally different energy. I'm like, wow, this is super masculine. And it just goes to show you how, all these different languages have a very different energy. You also feel like a different person. And, like people perceive you differently. And I think that's super beautiful. And the only way I know of to unlock that is by mastering different languages. And by the way, just to dive into that, what I've also experienced quite a bunch of times is if you have a friend that is, speaking different languages fluently, and you just always talk to him in one language, let's say English, but he's also almost kind of, native in Spanish, it even feels awkward to switch to the Spanish because it feels for you as if that person has a different character and it's like it feels like a totally different person, so again different energy, so you're kind of like I don't know this person, I want to continue speaking English with him even though it's obviously the same person, but it's such a different energy and such a different vibe, and you've kind of established your relationship in that language that it's kind of actually weird switching the language. So this is something you will experience as well. So very, very interesting, right? And yeah, that's like kind of one really, really, really big reason. The other reason is, of course, you're always going to have some more success with job opportunities, right? Because there's a difference of being able to kind of translate, even if it's live with your phone, in comparison to being able to speak it, just because in all kinds of communication, negotiation, and situations that arise professionally, it would still be kind of awkward if there was some way of translating, and there's just a different impact that you have when you're able to speak the language, and this is not never just gonna disappear, right? Then one very obvious general reason is, of course, your brain is gonna get better, which is always a plus, right? Because there's a lot of science about where your brain gets a lot better as far as kind of memory. You're unlocking different areas that you usually not using, and you're gonna get a lot quicker on your feet, which is obviously like a great advantage. And another big thing, and this comes back a little bit to kind of, kind of the personality thing. I've always felt that it's such a different experience when you talk with someone in a medium language that serves as a vehicle to kind of get your message across, like English, but the mother tongue of the other person is actually a different one. And I feel it's such a different access to that person, of getting to know that person, and you're never gonna get that deep into getting to know that specific person if you don't understand their mother tongue. Because what happens for a lot of or a lot of times is basically that yes, you can, kind of translate the content of what's being said, but a lot of it is just like the mimics, the way you articulate yourself, and a lot of things inside of what are being said can't be translated because there's no, there's, it's like it might be the same words, but there's like a different feeling and subcommunication that goes on beneath that, and this is something that just can't be translated. It's like everything you perceive in the language, all the different kind of dots that give you a very different impression of what is being communicated than just translating the words. And then of course there's also a lot of concepts that just don't make sense to translate one on one, because culturally they exist there but they may not exist in a different culture, okay? And this happens a lot of times as well. So this is another big reason, and I'm always a big fan of really getting to know the other person, establishing a deep, real relationship with the other person. And it's very different, if you just use a language like English that is not the mother tongue of the other person. So that's also a very, very big experience. And also, whenever you're kind of traveling and when you're really into the culture of the language that you're learning, you're just going to have so many beautiful experiences of being able to communicate with locals and experience everything of that culture in such a different richness, which can't, like, you can't put a price tag on that. This is just something that is so beautiful and that will stay with you for the rest of your life, that I think it's, absolutely worth it. Then, of course, it's always an advantage, let's say, if there was to happen something geopolitically. Basically, let's say for some reason you gotta move, right? It's always great if you know another language, because you're gonna have a different access to that different country that you wanna move to and the culture. It's gonna be a lot easier to do everything, and people are also gonna approach you very differently. And this is actually also like a big reason where, even though you could translate things, if you have to translate things with a tool and you're not able to speak the language, people are just gonna see you very differently, right? So they're gonna talk to you differently, they are gonna assume different things, they're gonna treat you very differently, and you're usually not gonna, of course this can still happen, but if they know that you know the language and you talk it actively, they are going to be a lot more welcoming and usually not try to, kind of scam you or everything. So it's just like a very, very different image that basically you put out there in the world if you're able to somewhat speak the language. And this is like a big reason too that just can't be replaced. And another thing that think is really great as well, and I've always been like a big kind of lover of that, is that I've always liked to consume content in its original language, being it for media or sources or whatever, or just to get a better glimpse about the things that other culture that are kind of a big topic in other cultures and other countries. And I think it's a very different experience if you're able to consume the content in its original language and not have to use the translation. Because at the end of the day, you never know, what is being translated, if it's accurately translated. And again, there's so much between the sentences, like that you can't put your finger on in the translation, that it's just gonna get lost in that translation. And it's a very different perception when you consume the content in its original form. So this is always something I really, really love. And I think this is something that is not just gonna go away. And I think to basically kind of sum it up, I feel that languages just enable you like no other thing to really deepen the experience of life, both how you feel internally and your surroundings, how it changes your brain and your personality, but also how you experience the world in all its richness, with all its culture, all its different people, and things you can learn from. And I don't see a scenario where this is just going away, unless we, of course, can, kind of communicate, just think about something and then, implanting that thought into the brain of the other person that we're meeting. But I think we're still some time away from that, and until that is going to happen, I think it's not going to get replaced. So the answer here after this long rant is basically yes, you should absolutely still learn a language in 2024 and the future. It's definitely worth it, and it's going to enrich your life in ways you don't even see right now and you don't even think possible. So absolutely go for it and learn a new language.